Hi, Theo Bloom from the BMJ, formerly British Medical Journal. But the link between sort of trust and what the digital assistants know was intriguing me. So my phone scared me rigid recently, actually quite some time ago, when I looked up a friend's address, drove to their house. It said, as I parked the car, it said, you know, you've parked outside number 1, but Vera lives at number 69, and you're going to her lunch today. So it knows that much about me. So clearly they're just not using it in the smart assistants currently. And I mean, one reaction that I had to that was to unsubscribe to everything. And I think you, Miles, said you came off Facebook. So are we going to see everyone refusing to hand over their personal information? And is that going to change how useful any of these technologies can be for us?
Who'd like to field that one first? Kate, I think that's you.
I'll kick off. Okay. I mean, I certainly think there's an element of that, and I'm sure it fits into the personas that Collin has looked at in terms of the... I think there's probably different degrees of trust within those personas. So I, for example, like to spend my Nectar points at Christmas when I've spent all my money on everything else, so I save my Nectar points all year and I spend them at Christmas. And for me, that's the trade-off. I know they've got my information, but sometimes they give me special offers and I get money off, but I feel like I understand what the data trade is. I guess the point about the fear is, you know, if Sainsbury's suddenly started targeting me with something that I felt they'd got the information from somewhere else, or I wasn't quite sure, then it puts that trust element of risk. I think probably, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's probably, though, only a small proportion of the audience that are tech savvy enough to start making those connections and making those cancellations. So I've got friends that will refuse to have a loyalty card. And I think, I don't care if Sainsbury's know that I always buy the cheapest toothpaste. Right. I'm going for the bargain, whatever. That doesn't bother me. That's the trade-off that I've made. It's when that trade-off turns out not to be true, or I'm actually giving them other information that I wasn't aware of. That's where the trust issues come into place. So I don't know if that sort of fits into your personas.
No, it does, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. It is a value exchange, and I think it has to be a transparent value exchange is the key. And I don't think that they've done a good enough job of doing that, of saying, here's the data that we're collecting, here's why we are collecting it, and here's what we're going to do with it. So, perfect example you gave, but clearly, Apple's not super transparent about, well, how did it get that information, and why is it giving you that information, or giving you? I mean, not to like keep on, not to restate GDPR, but it's like, well, why wouldn't it ask you if you want that, you know?
The health apps collect a lot of information and pass on in a huge network that people probably don't understand the value exchange.
Yep.
So can I do a riff here? And this is in recognition of your company, Theo. Does the brand matter? It's the BMJ. I trust the BMJ. And Mick, this goes from your experience in other industries.
I'm quite cynical, actually. I think that human nature is our evolutionary, millions of years, hardwires us for convenience and for free and for scarcity. And whilst we say we worry about our data privacy, when it comes to a service that we want to use, we see the terms and conditions. We do this, scroll, accept. And we lose track of how many times we do that. And when you do that, you may be saying not just the person you're transacting with current user data, but you may be agreeing that they can pass on to other people. So we can unsubscribe to services, and I personally am doing the same. I'm pulling back from a number of services. But I'm not really sure it makes much of a difference. I think there is just too much data leaking out there, and we as consumers compromise our higher ideals every time we go for them that privacy. So.
If I'm not mistaken, David was next. Yeah, and microphone in hand. He's ready to go.
Just as one example that's being switched on, I saw a very entertaining thing, which is actually Alexa's term and conditions. You can Google it. There was an Australian consumer protection body who hired an actor to read Alexa's terms and conditions. It's on YouTube, and it takes 9 hours. Right. So anyone that accepts Alexa's terms and conditions, unless they spent 9 hours reading them, doesn't really know what they've agreed to. So
Interesting.
And I thought 75 seconds was bad.
David.
My name's David Warlock. For the purposes of this session, no relation.
Full transparency.
I wanted, first of all, to say how much I've hugely enjoyed this morning. I thought it was 4 very stimulating speakers and tons of ideas and things to think about. And I'm very grateful to HighWire. But the thing which stimulated me most was the ideas of the customer journey in STM. And it does seem to me that we're in the middle of a huge shift as we have spent our lives thinking about the authorial production, publishing side of a world where actually increasingly important is who read what and did they retain it, how did they rate it, how did they use it. And I think that we're in a process of change. The trackable document allows us to see more and more and more of which scientists, as Daniel reminded us, downloaded something to a cache of documents which were going to be used in text mining or data mining. Who's doing what with what? And what are these groups? What is the homogeneity of that group of scientists against this group of scientists? And so that seems to me to be extremely important. But I wanted to ask the question, of course, we are moving to a machine-readable age. And more, scientists are not going to read articles, I would argue. They're going to read what machines tell them that those articles had inside them, which might have some significance for them.
Yes.
In most disciplines, we are publishing so much that nobody could possibly read all the articles relevant to their subject matter. So I want to put that dichotomy to our panel. In an age when we want to track the customer more and more, how do we work with a end user who is in fact a machine doing something else with the data?
So I'm going to go to Daniel first.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
So you're kind of at the cusp of this. How is it happening, and are you progressing to the way David's just described?
Yes. So what I think is interesting is in the past, people often had a specialty. They would get a journal which was for their specialty. They'd flip through every page and read it kind of front to cover, at least skim it. That really is not done anymore. So already the way people find articles is essentially through AI because they use a search engine. They use PubMed or Google Scholar. So to already get that article, it depended on the article having some visibility and coming up as a search result. So I think that's going to continue to be the case. I think because what scholars do is so highly involved and so technical, they do often have to go back to the original publication. So I don't think it's going to be...
So is it a narrowing? Is it the machine's going to take you from having to read this much to you should really only look at these?
Exactly. It's like there are 25 million publications, but what you're looking for is maybe 3 paragraphs in a few of those publications, and they would be impossible to find without machine learning and AI to direct you there. But you still need to get to those paragraphs in full.
So Mick, applying that to more consumer experience.
Well, the immediate thing I think strikes to me is trust. So 2 things, which is first of all, is do you understand the AI, which needs a kind of brand, and maybe there are roles for people here to have branded AIs, which is at least because what that's making decisions for you, and it's ruling out information that you will not see. You are being drawn into a bubble, and we've seen it, for example, in social media. You could be drawn into a bubble if it's gearing around your preferences. You could be just being cycled back to look at narrower and narrower subsets of information that reinforce your beliefs. So you've got to be very, very careful about whose AI it is. And then I think your point earlier, one of the other problems then is nobody knows how these work.
Yes.
They work, but nobody can explain them, but by definition.
Yes.
So I think that is the world that's to come. It creates enormous challenges, though. But in creating challenges, that's a great opportunity for people to understand this world. Because if it's confusing to the experts, just think of what it's like for the end reader. And there's opportunities maybe for value for some of you to be the trusted brands who say, we will use these amazing tools to make your choices easier, but we will do so in a way that protects you from being put off in a bubble or from misinterpretations or missummarizations.
Yeah. And there are already examples of tools that do
That's what I was
exactly
gonna ask. Okay,
what David's described, which there's one that we looked at Outsell the other day. It's called Consider. So CONSIDDR, consider. So it's really annoying things that you can't pronounce. But that's essentially what it does. It's designed for marketers, for PR comms, for journalists, people who don't want to subscribe to all of that material and haven't got time to read all the full text. They need to produce a press release that's got 2 data points that support one of the reasons why they've launched this product. Or they need to write a news article about the product and they need 2 data points that support it. And so it artificially creates insights from a range of articles, and it will deliver to you the insights with a couple of the links to the articles if you want to read them, but generally they don't want to read them. It's, having looked across all of the body of material, the world's temperature has gone up by X% over the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. This is what these expert articles have said. That's all they need. Boom, they're off to the next thing. And that isn't the case necessarily when you come to scientific research. I hope. It's not. It doesn't have that time sensitivity. Yes. It doesn't have that. I just need a couple of data points to prove it, and actually in half an hour I'm going to be on to something else. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important, therefore, to look again at what that sort of user persona looks like and what the use case is, in order to understand how those applications and those technology applications will work in different areas. For marketing and PR and journalism, that could be great. Mm-hmm. But that platform will need to be tweaked and delivered in a different way if you're going to use it, even though the needs in some ways are similar for researchers.
Yes. I saw more hands, but one in particular was John Sack. Can we get John a microphone, please?
Thanks. John Sack, founding director at HighWire. I wanted to go back and pick up from Theo's comment, first comment question, and tie a few points together. It struck me that, Theo, you were asking about, in some ways, personalization, and how much personalization is needed for effective interaction, for an effective customer experience. An interesting data point in our industry, as we all know, Google, as a search engine, is highly personalized. If 2 of us sitting in this room do the same Google search, I'll almost guarantee you we'll get different search results. Google Scholar is not personalized. And I've actually been in a session with one of the co-founders of Google Scholar where people in the room argued that with him, telling him it was. And he had to demonstrate that it was not by having 2 people do the same search and they get exactly the same search result. So I think that there's a use case for non-personalization, basically that researchers don't want to be led astray by their prior biases, at the least. On the other hand, if you turn off all the personalization, then you get the problem of lack of context that we were seeing with the intelligent assistants. Essentially, you have to personalize it with every statement, and I think that would be a real drag. Given how complicated some of the things are that people are working on. So I guess my point is that there's probably this dialectic between what we're willing to give up and the customer experience that we're going to see. And I don't know where the balance is going to come out, but different use cases might need a different balance point. Okay. And Google Scholar and Google Web Search are an illustration of that. I wanted to ask a question and just make an observation that looking at the Google Assistant as coming out ahead of all the other assistants in your study, does that suggest that advertisers will go there first because it's going to give the best user experience, or might there be some other dynamic going on there?
So 2 things. One, that today there is no form of advertising within any of the assistants today, just so everyone is clear on that. Number 2 is that I think, yes, Google Assistant is clearly the market leader in terms of its ability to deliver a good customer experience to the user. And it's not in a specific, I mean, this is Google's strength in advertising, is that it's not in a specific industry. It crosses all industries, whereas Alexa, inherently, because it's owned by Amazon, is more in the consumer product industry than anything else. So yes, I think that advertisers are going to go directly to Google Assistant. And even though there are no ads in it today, you can bet your bottom dollar that there will be advertising once they figure out the experience, and once there are more people. The reason there's not even advertising today is not actually because of the experience. That's a lie from Sundar. The reason that there's not advertising in Google Assistant is because they don't have the supply of questions to deliver the demand from advertisers wanting to buy advertising against running shoes. If you're asking about running shoes from Google Assistant, they just don't have that supply of questions.
Yeah, I wonder how much that'll matter, because if you look at the video ads that you get in YouTube now, you see that it doesn't have much to do with what you're
True.
trying to watch.
Right.
You get an ad for a bank no matter what.
Fair, touche.
So the question I had, I enjoyed your example of Google Glass, because we saw a lot of Google Glass out in Silicon Valley. My impression wasn't that it has disappeared, but that it's going to get reused into very specific use cases where people need hands-free sort of information interrogation and viewing. And I'm wondering, will there be intelligent assistants, for example, that show up in labs where, or in surgery centers where people must not touch things? They shouldn't be touching their cell phones anyway. Will there be those kinds of verticals that will become the primary use cases and drive pieces of an industry?
I could totally see where that could happen. I'll give you again, I always, like the only thing I know is marketing. The Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas has its own intelligent agent that is deployed in every room in the hotel. And you can basically ask it anything about what events are going on tonight. I'd like to order room service. So you're already seeing this start to happen in certain industries where they're applying their own intelligent agent and having simple use cases for it. So you can totally see where that could happen in the science field as well.
Just by a show of hands, whose companies are investigating voice search, intelligent assistant search now? Aha. Okay, we got one. We got us. Yes, exactly. Right? After this event, who's going to look into this? All right, we rang a few bells. All right, very good, very good. I have a question for Mick, and I have to see it through the commerce perspective. Without the budget and resource of a company the size of BT, what can smaller organizations, and a number of them are represented here, do when they're kind of dropped in the hot water? They're the frog in the hot water.
So it's always the challenge of resource allocation. I think if you are confident that your resources in your business are perfectly optimized against the challenges and opportunities that you face, I applaud you. Any company, whether big or small, I've worked in, generally doesn't have perfect resource allocation. I think responding to these type of challenges are, it's an old cliche, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
Okay, so if you are convinced, and you convince the stakeholders around you, that the organisation needs to make a change, people will reprioritize.
Only because I've been asked, not once, not twice, but 3 times, can Mick come visit my company? So at the networking event, I'm sure some people will be approaching you because breaking through has been a challenge in a variety of companies. Okay.
Yeah, it is, because this is about, so there's nothing harder than changing people, right?
Yes.
People are successful by doing things a certain way, and they're going to keep on doing them forever,
Yes.
Until something stops them. And it's unnatural to change ahead of that forcing event.
Yes.
But most of us can't respond fast enough once the event happens. So
But to your point, it was a lot easier to make the change when you were in the hot water,
absolutely,
rather than to make the change when things are going well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's much harder doing things going well because it's easy to just, why don't we just put that back 6 months? Or
Yep.
You see.
Yep. Additional questions? Yes, please. Ruth?
I was concentrating so hard.
Hey, you're doing a fine job.
very much. Thanks very much for very insightful discussions and presentations. Kasia Trojanowska, National Collaborating Center for Mental Health. I'm also a freelance copy editor. I have a question to Daniel. Daniel, a lot of the problems that you mentioned and the solutions that you've suggested to them center around moving the most of the work, as I see it, onto the author. The publishing industry, as I see it, has been built around taking that onus from the author and sort of saying, look, you give us your manuscript, we'll produce it for you. Do you think that the authors are actually ready to take that responsibility and take it, off our hands, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think if journals and publishers can actually make it easier for the authors by assuming some of these tasks, that's great. And I think copy editing is probably one where currently when a journal provides copy editing, the authors really appreciate that and it helps the manuscript. Some of these other tasks, I actually find that the journal can be a little bit destructive or obstructive just because the systems are not in place and a lot of errors get introduced. Such that, when I'm looking through the proof, it's not like the journal has caught that many errors, but they've introduced more errors. So I think authors will appreciate help from journals, and but you have to make sure that the help is actually help. And right now, journals have these guidelines that are very burdensome to apply with, or comply with, and many authors would say, well, they're not actually helping me; they're making it harder.
Mm-hmm.
So as we probably move to more APC models, I think there's an opportunity to maybe have dynamic pricing over what types of help the authors want.
What kind of service you want.
What kind of service you want.
Yeah, right.
And through that, maybe you can find what are the valuable services that you're providing.
Yeah, I think it's more about streamlining, making the services more efficient than necessarily shifting the burden from the publisher to the author. It may be that the process of streamlining means that the author gets more involved because that's more efficient. That's not the point of it. So I can see, for example, citations are I've written articles myself, and they're such a headache. So if you had a system, for example, where an author could just throw in the key details of the article, and then you had something which resolved to the DOI with the full details, and then plug that into the system. So you've started the process because you've got to identify the article, but all the pain is taken away because you've got a clever system that spots it's that particular article and then feeds in the data, and then manages it in a way that can survive through all the different versions. I presume it's that kind of solution that you're interested in.
Exactly, yeah. I think that's a nice clarification. So right now, it's kind of like the work is duplicated. The authors are doing it and the journals are doing it. So if we could streamline it so one can do it or the other, or they can collaborate. Maybe journals need to be more, and authors, that relationship should be more collaborative, like they're working on a common output together.
Yeah, but the publisher has an equal role, maybe.
Exactly.
Right.
They're still
And to the point you made earlier, the publisher who's going to accelerate the acceptance process, the publisher who's going to publish me sooner, the publisher who's going to provide me the service, that's the one I'm going to be drawn to.
Yeah, that's interesting because we've done some research amongst our authors, and to my surprise, because I wasn't quite expecting this, and these are mainly tenured people, well-established people who write frequently, and they still say finding the best publication outlet is a challenge for them.
Yes.
And I'm sure that they, not only there's prestige, impact factor, and all that kind of thing, but I'm sure going forward, if one could produce some metrics which show, well, this journal will get your article published more quickly and with less pain, that could well become a factor which drives people traffic towards one article when they maybe one journal when they've possibly got a short list of 3 or 4 that they could equally submit to. So it could well matter.
Exactly, and it gets back to the age of consumer thing, where the metrics about how journals perform and customer satisfaction, those really haven't been available in the past. It was more word of mouth, and now they're becoming more available. So whereas people didn't used to use that information to make decisions, now they may.
Do you have additional questions? Okay.